Two Met police officers have been sacked after being secretly filmed as part of a documentary. Comments by PC Philip Nielsen and PC Martin Borg were found to amount to gross misconduct. Northern Ireland's First Minister said she will continue to support the Bloody Sunday family's pursuit of justice after the acquittal of Soldier F. The veteran was cleared of 2 counts of murder and 5 of attempted murder. And the King has prayed with the Pope in a historic moment at the Vatican's Sistine Chapel. It's the first time since Henry VIII split England from the Catholic Church in 1534 that such a service has taken place. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 63 points at 95.78. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.14. LBC weather, scattered showers moving into Wales and southwest England tonight. Some isolated showers in the north, lows of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. The Home Office is a rather nice building. I pass it most days on my way to get my lunchtime sandwich. It's got big planes of coloured glass outside and it looks rather bright and friendly. Unfortunately, inside the Home Office isn't bright or friendly. It's largely useless. In the words of the current Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, it's not yet fit for purpose, while a recent report by the now Tory MP Nick Timothy complained that it suffered from a culture of defeatism and was detached from reality. Now, for you and me, all of this is really very serious because this is the part of government responsible for policing, security, the borders, immigration and much more. If it isn't working, then for many people, government isn't working. Mahmood promises radical reforms, but meanwhile, after so many policing failures, from the Wayne Couzens affair in London to the aggressive treatment of lockdown offenders in the north of England, we're going to get a once-in-a-generation review of police leadership. And that is going to be led by Lord David Blunkett, who joins me in the studio now. David, thank you for coming in.
Good evening.
Can I ask you, first of all, about the police review? Because this is a review of police leadership. And I presume that the message is if you get the right people at the top, everything then improves quite quickly.
Well, for the public, as well as for those working in the service, leadership is absolutely crucial, whether it's the sergeant in the local, if you've got one, local station, and we've seen with what happened at Charing Cross in terms of their custody suite.
Indeed,
all the way through to Chief Constable, where we've seen somebody now being prosecuted for miscreants in public life by lying about, or allegedly lying about, his past when he was appointed. So it's right from bottom to top.
Absolutely. And indeed, I was going to say we've seen 2 police officers suspended, I think, today because of that panorama film about the Charing Cross station. When you look around the police forces across the UK, do you see people who you think, actually, this person is doing a really good job there? We want more like him or more like her.
Yes, they're superb people. And those in communities that are fortunate to have them will know it. They'll know that they're go-getters, they're motivators, they can lift the morale, they have a sense of ethics, and I'm not talking about woke, I'm talking about right and wrong and morality. They're energised and really committed. You never hear them say, I can't be bothered or I'm too busy. They're on it, and people will know those people at every level of the police service right across Britain. But there are others where people know that things are going wrong. It could be somebody else's brother or uncle or aunt or sister down the road. I'm always saying to people, when we talk about government or public services or whatever, private enterprise falling apart and you can't get people on the phone, the rest of it, we're talking about somebody else's relative who's letting you down. So this isn't just a systemic problem for government and for administration. This is about what we do to each other, if that makes any sense. And we forget that. We forget that when somebody is giving us the cold shoulder when we're trying to get a service, they're actually probably at some point going to give their own relatives a cold shoulder. I'd like to write a play about that, where it turns out that the person who is really arsey ends up doing it to their brother.
Absolutely. they are all of us in that sense. But we know in terms of police commissioners, there's parts of the UK, parts of England, for instance, where the shoplifting epidemic has been more or less sorted out by a very, very engaged...
I'm being run by
You're being run by the Home Secretary already. That's Shabana Mahmood on the phone. So the big question is, how do you get the right people in charge?
Well, firstly, the recruitment process and vetting is absolutely fundamental. Training and monitoring, you can spot people with potential for leadership. And the process of examination is chronic at the moment. I mean, it's improved over a decade from what it was. But for instance, 50% of those going in for the sergeant exams don't complete. So there's something amiss there. We're only getting 2 or 3 candidates going through for chief constable appointments. Well, there's something drastically wrong there. So the training, the progression, the mentoring, monitoring what they're doing, that's appraising all the time, how they're doing, providing them with extra skills where that's needed. And it's about people management and resource management. It's both. So if they're good people managers, they'll bring the best out in people, they'll motivate them. If they're good resource managers, they'll use what are always limited resources really well and consistently. It's, by the way, why we've got Bill Bratton from the previously New York and LA Commissioner of Police, because he was the one who drove 20 odd years ago when I was Home Secretary, a really data-driven street-by-street analysis when it wasn't fashionable, when it was only just coming in. And we brought him across. Not everybody was very happy with us getting him across to tell us what to do, because people don't want to be told what to do from outside. But the commissioners will bring that kind of weight and understanding.
Yeah. We're sitting here in London, David. Do you think the Met Police is fit for purpose at the moment?
Well, I don't think it's not a phrase I ever use, but I don't think Sir Mark Rowley would accept that it is, because he's been driving over the last 2 years in particular a major change programme. He's removed 1,500 officers from the force. I think that's something to celebrate, not because we're glad that there were 1,500 officers who shouldn't have been in the force and weren't doing the job, but because he's doing something about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. A moment ago, David, you mentioned you were in the Home Office 20 odd years ago. At the beginning of the show, I was listing some of the things that people have been saying about the Home Office right now, and they're pretty excoriating. Nick Timothy, who's now a Tory MP, before he became an MP, did a review of the Home Office inside, a lengthy review, and it's only now been made public. And it talks about the defeatism, the poor culture, the divorced from reality comments that he finds again and again. Was it as bad in your time? Has this been a cultural problem inside the Home Office for decades, or is it new?
Yeah, I think Nick Timothy, who, by the way, was a graduate of Sheffield University in the same department as I graduated from, but at a different era. I think he produced that in 2023, didn't it?
Yes,
and I'm hoping that the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, will pick that up, because...
Well, she says it's still not fit for purpose.
Well, it was a phrase John Reid used when he was Home Secretary. You actually have a terrific analogy about the building. You talked about this relatively new building. It's 20 years old. I was in the old building on Queen Anne's Gate. I mean, the windows were falling out. The toilets sometimes went into reverse. So what you're experiencing the Home Office at the moment in terms of functionality was made doubly worse by the building, I promise you. Yes, things have been really difficult. Sometimes there's a moment. I had it when the attack took place on the World Trade Center in 2001, where the Home Office reacted well and speedily. And there were examples of absolutely superb civil servants who drove things through. But it reverts into a kind of lethargy. There's an inertia, not only in the Home Office, by the way, but the Home Office is a classic example. One reason, which is logical, is they're dealing with the most difficult parts of our public life.
Yes, there is an argument which says actually it's too big, it should be broken up. It's trying to do too many different things.
I don't accept that. It's been broken up once. I had justice and therefore prisons and probation and all that in with me. It wasn't the size of the department, because we were able to match the Treasury nose to nose, balkanising government strengthens the Treasury. It's about basic competence and efficiency, bringing people in, rewarding them well. I'm not just talking about promotion. I'm talking about acknowledgement and recognition, and allowing them to be promoted on merit to other places, because it's very easy to work. They're going to kill me for this. Much easier to work in the Treasury and the Foreign Office than it is in the Home Office, just because of the nature of the challenge. We used to wake up every morning and the press office would ring me just before 7 a.m. with what was then the really important legacy media before social media took over. And we'd run through, and every day there were 3 or 4 items that would be on the news. And it was wearing, but it was also a challenge. And if you've got really good people who are prepared to get a grip, look at the problems, come up with solutions, listen to people outside, which, by the way, is why we've got to, on the commission, we've got to listen rather than reinventing the wheel. A lot of this has been looked at over and over again. Let's use that talent. I think Shabana Mahmood, she's only been in there, 6-7 weeks, has got the drive and energy.
You like the cut of her, Jim?
Oh, I really do, yeah. I had a very good meeting with her on Tuesday. I think she knows what she wants to do. I know she's got a massive portfolio to deal with, but I think she knows the challenge. And by the way, she's got some very good people around her.
I'm sure she does. One of those people, some people might say, is the Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, who is facing an absolute onslaught, including, I think most damagingly, from some of the victims of the so-called grooming gangs who are saying they don't have confidence in her and she should go. She's had other victims coming out supporting her today, but obviously her position is in difficulty. What's your view?
Well, we are inclined to trash individuals these days, particularly those who have got the most difficult roles. It's why, by the way, there's no inquiry chair been appointed because of the difficulty and people resigning. Like, you've had really good people who have said, I'm not going to be abused like this. I'm not going to be taken to task because of the job I held a few years ago. Not because they've done anything wrong, by the way, just because they were in the wrong profession. 4 of the 30 of those victims who were on the advisory board have resigned and are attacking Jess Phillips. But others, as you've just said, have come out in her favour. Look, if anybody looks at Jess Phillips's record of fighting for women and girls in terms of their safety and security and what's right for them, take a look at it and then tell me that she's not the right minister to be able to do this job.
Do you think
and I've got a piece of advice for Kemi Badenoch. Be very careful on these occasions when you're dealing with extremely vulnerable people, not to use them as a political football, because not only does it not become you and it's not right for the leader of the opposition, but you might find that you've made a big mistake.
Do you think she is politically manipulating victims?
Oh, I don't. How can you talk in those terms with victims? You're immediately torn to pieces, and they've gone through hell, and they are totally entitled to their view that things have not moved properly or speedily enough, or they've not been listened to. I get that, and it's perception's everything. So if they believe that, you've got to take it on board and do something about it. And we're back to moving faster and more decisively. But, who's going to take on this inquiry every time?
It's a really big question.
They appear on the list and they're immediately trashed. I mean, it's got to do it. Why would you?
That is an absolutely crucial question, David Rich. I'm now going to pick up with Aggie, Chambre, LBC's political correspondent. Can I just say, it's always such a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you once again.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for giving the time to discuss things properly.
Thank you so much. And hooray for the dog as well, who's been incredibly well behaved.
Yeah, he's heard it all before.
Thanks, David. Aggie, can I turn, picking up directly from what we were saying with David there, to Jess Phillips' position? Because what we've heard in the course of the afternoon is some of the other victims coming out and saying, actually, they do have confidence in her.
Indeed, Andrew. So today we've had the news that 5 survivors have come out to back Jess Phillips. These are 5 people who are on the panel and saying they will quit this panel if she does actually resign. Of course, there are 5 members of that panel, 5 survivors on the panel who are saying they will quit and they will not return to the panel if she stays on. So difficult position. And one of these women who said who's come out to back Jess Phillips has waived her anonymity, Samantha Walker-Roberts, and basically said that Jess Phillips has devoted her life to hearing and amplifying the voices of women and girls who otherwise would have been unheard. I think we are seeing today a bit of it's been described to me as an Operation Save Jess campaign. We've heard from the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, both giving Jess Phillips their full support. But there are, I think, still big question marks about what this panel looks like going forward, and also big question marks about Jess Phillips's role within it.
Very interesting. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting from what David Blunkett was saying was the difficulty of getting a chair for this now, because we've had a former police officer who's had to step away because he's a former police officer. We've had a former social worker having to step away because she was a former social worker, and lots of people thinking it's going to be a very, very hard job now to fill.
Who on earth would want this job? I think that is the question a lot of people are asking. And we're told the Home Office are looking at new candidates. Still today, people are still putting their names forward. And the government does want to move, we understand, as fast as possible. But they think it's likely to actually take months before there is somebody who accepts that role. Baroness Louise Casey is involved in helping selecting that person. There are still, I think, questions about whether she actually might be the person. Other people suggesting it should be a judge. But government today also reaching out to survivors, including those who have quit, to try and re-engage them and talk to them about who they want to lead this as well.
Well, that seems the absolutely sensible thing for them to be doing right at the moment. Aggie, thank you so much for that. Up next, a truly historic moment in Rome today as Pope Leo and King Charles became the first heads of their respective churches to pray together. The first time that's happened since the Reformation. We're going to hear from the head of the Catholic Church in England and Wales, but you're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:17.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why this staggering level of incompetence?
Straight to the point.
This is the economics of the madhouse from this government.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
But she does seem to struggle with her sums.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
Sharing intimate photos of her without her consent.
Unwanted touching. Unwanted comments. Unwanted nudes.
Controlling what she can and can't wear.
Controlling who she can and can't see.
Threatening her.
Enough. This is abuse.
If you think it's wrong, act on it.
Call it out, show support, report it.
There are many ways you can safely tackle violence against women and girls. Find out how at gov.uk/enough. If someone is in danger, call 999.
If you bought a home on a holiday park in the UK, what you thought you were getting may not be what you ended up with. From unexpected site fee increases, running costs, a huge depreciation in value, many owners feel they've been missold. If you think this might be you, holidayparkadvicecentre.co.uk could help you receive the compensation you're entitled to. Text ASSIST to 78900 to find out more. That's ASSIST to 78900.
I'm telling you, raise taxes, that's how.
Cut spending, less waste, more sense.
Move north, get more for your money.
Until winter hits your heating bill.
Fair.
Up to 9.13% annual return. We all agree that's strong.
Yeah,
that's hard to ignore.
Cufflink. Auto invest property backed from £500. Visit cufflink.com. That's KUFLINK. Register your interest today. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to IF ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:19. No, he's not Prime Minister. But Tony Blair remains one of the most influential figures in British politics through his Tony Blair Institute. And there seems to be a bit of a row brewing between that and the current Climate Change Secretary, Ed Miliband. In a paper just published, the TBI Energy Policy Advisor, Tona Langengen, says that although the Clean Energy by 2030 plan was right for its time, things have changed. Tonya joins me in the studio now. Welcome to you. An uneducated, brusque sort of assessment of what you're saying would be a bit more growth, a bit less clean energy.
Well, I think to a certain extent, that's correct. I think we are saying that we're in a cost of living crisis, and economic growth is clearly the government's main priority. The clean power mission, as it currently stands, is likely to drive up bills. Octopus Energy said last week it will maybe drive up bills by as much as 20%, even if wholesale prices fall. So what we're saying is you need to go a little bit slower on that mission to get cheaper power.
And get business working. And the other side of that, I guess, is how they deal with what the oil and gas left in the North Sea. We're waiting for the Roswell decision from Ed Miliband. But meanwhile, I see that the North Sea Transition Authority has said that they think there's an extra 1.1 billion barrels of oil in the North Sea compared with what we thought. So there is a lot of oil and gas there. And that is going to be a long-running political argument, clearly. Is your advice in the transition period, keep getting it out?
Well, I think our advice is obviously you should depend on the resources you have. Obviously we have a lot of oil and gas left, and there are strong economic and energy security reasons why you might want to keep doing that. But I think the crucial point is there is not that much oil and gas left in the North Sea, so we do need a plan B. And clearly, clean power is that plan. But
so you're not anti-clean.
Pacing.
You're not anti the windmills and the hydrogen capture and all the rest of it.
Absolutely not. I think that the thing is, though, you have to make it work, and you have to work with the kind of technical and economic circumstances. And what we're seeing right now, for instance, is that the interest rates have obviously skyrocketed, which means that offshore wind is likely to come in at very high prices. And our view is you shouldn't pay any price for that offshore wind. You should take a kind of value for money perspective on it and make sure it's good for people in the long term, given the cost of living and economic growth.
I mean, the politics here are unavoidable. It's clear that, ahead of the budget, you're quite right, growth is the mission. And it's clear that, we know that the Prime Minister tried to move Ed Miliband at the time of the last reshuffle, and Ed said, no thanks, mate, and he gave in at that point. But he's told, the Prime Minister has told Scottish journalists in the last couple of days that he thinks that he wants to double down on the need for oil and gas coming out of the North Sea during the transition period, and that's going to be the case for many years to come. Mm-hmm. Do you, therefore, detect a change in the government's attitude to all of this?
Yeah, look, I think the government's very clear on the fact that they recognise the cost of living crisis and they recognise economic growth, and I think that's partially why we're kind of calling for this shift in priorities. The clean power mission sits kind of awkwardly, I suppose, within that context. Except
that it is the nearest thing the government has to an industrial policy at the moment. Get rid of that, and there's not a lot left.
I still think, though, you can have. I mean, because as you kind of pointed out, we're still in favour of the transition. I think we're just slightly looking at different things. And I don't think also an industrial strategy just needs to be, big projects like CCS and wind turbines. It can also be things like AI, for instance, thinking about how to implement that into the grid.
This is for sure the big argument at the heart of the government at the moment. Doña Langengen, thank you very much indeed for explaining a bit about it to us. Thank you so much for that. Now then, a moment of history earlier today when the King, who's head of the Church of England, and Pope Leo, who runs the other lot, prayed in public together in the Vatican's Sistine Chapel under Michelangelo's painting of the Last Judgment, which is a lovely piece of work. The Catholic Church still does not recognise Anglican religious authorities, and the split goes back, of course, to Henry VIII and the Reformation. The idea now is to bring the Anglican and Catholic communions a little closer together. People who describe themselves as Christians make up about half of Britain's population, by far the biggest group, although church-going continues to decline. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now live from the English College in Rome by Cardinal Vincent Nichols, Archbishop of Westminster and the leader of the Catholic Church in England and Wales. Archbishop, first of all, an extraordinary moment today. How did you feel when you saw it happening?
Yes, it was very extraordinary. Two events, one in the Sistine Chapel that you've described, and the second one in the Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls at the tomb of St. Paul. And I think to start with the second one, you really need a keen sense of history.
Yeah.
The origins that we were looking at today go back to medieval England, when the monarch of England was the protector and the promoter of that church in Rome with the agreements of the Pope. Now, it's a long time ago, but we have to come to terms with our past if we're going to make a better future. And the fact that the Pope, the monastery gave the king this very, very special position now in its history and its presence, I think gives us a better hope for the future. I think in so many lives, dealing with the past and shaping a better future are really important challenges to take. And it's certainly true for these two huge institutions, as you say, the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, the Anglican Communion.
Well, it's been a long time since England and Britain, and in fact all of Europe, was torn apart during the Reformation. And it's been a long time, really, since the two churches have been able to be close since then. We've now got a female, the first female Archbishop of Canterbury. And I wonder how you thought when you saw that happening. Was it a refreshing moment, a cheering moment?
No, for me, it was simply respect for the way the Church of England runs its business conducts its life of faith. We had on our side an election of the Pope, which was done very differently. And the Church of England has its ways of doing things, the Anglican Communion. And okay, that's the decision, that is to be respected, and we will obviously work with the new Archbishop of Canterbury when she's in place.
We've got two people leading the two churches, who are relatively new in the post, if I can put it that way. Do you think this is an important moment in the sense that King Charles is a man of very strong faith and the Pope is a man who is a reformer as well as a man of strong faith? In other words, there is a kind of coming together we might not have seen before.
I think that's true. And it's facilitated by the fact that for Pope Leo, his first language is English. And that hasn't been the case for many, many centuries. And I think that makes much easier the conversation between the two men that they had this morning. So subtlety of language, gentleness of expression, these don't have to now be mediated through translators. So these two, the King and the Pope, I think would have understood each other very quickly and quite profoundly.
And how would you hope that that very important symbolic moment actually changes the two churches going forward?
Well, I have constant meetings with other church leaders, both in London and across the whole of England. I think at our level we'd be encouraged, but I think the power of this moment is its symbolism and how it might shift people's view of the role of churches and the role of faith in our society. I think we've lived too long with the notion that religious faith is a problem. It's something we've got to sort out. It's not a real player. But in fact, religious faith is not a problem to be solved. It's a resource to be used. And that means cooperation between the faiths and certainly between the followers of Christ. So there's a project here which I know is close to the King's heart, and it is certainly close to the leadership of the Catholic Church. We've got to get together to serve with the truth and with charity.
Church going in both churches has been falling for a long time now. Is this a moment where you think communicants for the Roman Catholic Church and the Anglican Church have, in a sense, to stand together shoulder to shoulder a bit more closely?
Yes, I'm slightly more cheerful than that view, Andrew. I think we've seen in the last year or so the beginnings of an uptake of religious faith. And the research that's been done indicates that it's mostly among men between the ages of 20 and 30. And certainly that is the evidence across our parishes in London that, those who've been coming into the Catholic Church during that last Easter had a predominance of that age group and of men. So there are green shoots. And so I'd be a little more optimistic than that.
There are green shoots, but there are some pretty fiery shoots as well, in the sense that the really big growth in Christianity in Britain at the moment seems to be coming from the Pentecostalist churches, very often the black Pentecostalist churches in London and other big cities. How do you regard that? I mean, that is a very, very different tradition to yours.
Well, it is, but actually the research indicated that the largest growth of this age group was into the Catholic Church. But next week, I'll be meeting with all the leaders of churches, including black-led Pentecostal churches and other churches as well. And what we do in our meetings is try to find the common ground that we have and understand a bit more deeply each other's motivation. And they're quite big challenges, but they're on board and we work at them week by week.
Right. Finally, to the elephant in the room. There's no doubt that when the king arrived in Rome, hanging over him was the terrible problem of his brother, the scandal around Epstein and Prince Andrew. Now, it's a very, very difficult thing, but he is both the head of the church and also a member of a family which has this terrible problem right in the middle of it. In a kind of pastoral sense, what would your advice to him be?
Well, you know, one of the unique things about today was that these two great leaders prayed together. And I'm quite sure that in the king's heart, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if it wasn't in the Pope's heart, was the heartache of the situation of the royal family and of that victim, Virginia, as well. And I think what they showed us today would be, it's best to judge these matters when we stand before God. And it's best to bring these things to God, because quite often we know that we're beyond finding a neat solution to them. So it's to live through problems in the perspective of a God whose providence is at work, and we struggle simply to do our best.
Cardinal, thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for speaking to LBC tonight. It's been greatly appreciated. Now, there's a lot going down in Washington at the moment, but then again, when isn't there? We'll be talking about demolition and perhaps the biggest moment in the struggle between Trump and Putin so far. But first of all, the time now, 6:32, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Resident doctors in England will go on strike for 5 days next month in a row over pay and jobs. Members of the British Medical Association will walk out from the 14th of November. The Health Secretary has called the action unnecessary. 2 Met police officers have been sacked for gross misconduct over comments they were secretly filmed making. PC Martin Borg and PC Philip Nielsen featured in a documentary earlier this month. And former Home Secretary Sir David Blunkett has told LBC he believes Jess Phillips should stay on as Safeguarding Minister. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, he says you just need to look at her record to see she is the right person for the job. LBC weather, scattered showers moving into Wales and southwest England tonight. Some isolated showers in the north, lows of 4 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
With the news that one of the people we sent back to France who came on a small boat has returned, we ask whether anything can solve the small boat's crisis.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
When's the perfect moment to take that leap? With electric vehicles, that moment is now. The all-electric Leap Motor T03. Right now, with the Leap grant, it's incredible value at 169 deposit and 169 per month with 0% APR, with amazing tech and spec too. Leap Motor. It's time to leap. Search Leap Motor T03. Personal contract purchase, mint green, T03, 48 months. Optional final payment, 5675. Leap Motor is credit broker, not in lender. Subject to status. T's and C's, Stellantis Financial Services.
So, what's on your to-do list today? Why don't you check if you're eligible for pension credit? It tops up your pension income and also opens up help with heating bills, council tax, and more. Search pension credit on gov.uk or call 0800 99 1234. There's nothing to lose. Check today. Pension credit. Credit where credit's due. Eligibility criteria apply.
Train to 3 bridges for 2 adults, 1 skeleton and 1 fairy werewolf, as you do. Just 1 pumpkin each, kids! Charlie, not that one, mate. It's nearly as big as you. Back on the train with 2 little monsters and a couple of pumpkins. Now off home to spend a good 3 hours carving. Download the Thameslink Railway app to book kids' tickets for £2 on off-peak journeys. Thameslink Railway, where every stop is a story.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35. Now, you might think that British voices aren't very well placed to complain about Donald Trump's decision to demolish a big chunk of the White House to build himself a new ballroom. After all, it was the British in 1812 who marched into Washington and burned a lot of it to the ground, including damaging much of the then new White House. But there's no doubt that bulldozing the East Wing entirely is causing a big row in the United States. To talk about that and a highly significant move against Russia today, I'm joined now by LBC's Washington correspondent in the studio, Simon Marks. Simon, great to have you in the flesh.
Lovely to be here, Andrew.
Before you head back again. So this White House row, I mean, the White House is obviously iconic for a lot of Americans. They have a kind of emotional reaction to it. And Trump is knocking down more of it than we expected.
Well, we didn't expect him to knock any of it down based on what he had said just weeks ago, that his plan to build the ballroom, the 90,000 square foot ballroom that he now says is going to cost around $300 million, was going to take place in a way that left the building whole. It wasn't going to be right up next to the East Wing, but it wasn't going to touch it. Then suddenly, earlier in the week, there were reports that bits of the East Wing were being torn down. Yesterday, he conceded that the entire East Wing of the White House, which has been there since 1902 and has been the preserve of successive first ladies for generations, although Melania Trump doesn't really use it because she's not at the White House very much, it's all being pulled down. It will be gone within the next 24 to 36 hours. And what is so absolutely extraordinary about this is that this is being done without any permission, without any accountability. Unlike all of those previous numerous acts of renovation and remodeling that have been done. 1950, Harry Truman saved the building from ruin when he refurbished it, but that was all done in conjunction with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the National Capital Planning Commission.
So are there not laws and rules about this kind of thing?
There absolutely are. I mean, a lot of them, and this will be familiar because we keep finding this out as Donald Trump tests the limits of his power, a lot of them turn out to be conventions and traditions, but there are some requirements that this White House has clearly flouted, and indeed the National Trust for Historic Preservation asked yesterday for the teardown to stop so that the plans that the White House has not yet submitted could at least be reviewed. And instead, he is sailing on with the wholesale destruction of the East Wing of a building that is not his. It's the American people's. It's a preservation site. And he's the only president who sort of moves in and treats it very much as though it's nothing to do with the American people. He can do whatever he wants with it.
Just another piece of real estate.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about why he's doing this, because this great ballroom kind of conjures images of the kind of 1890s and 1900s and people in sort of wasp waist gowns and top hats kind of spinning around. There is a sense that he is going back to the so-called gilded or golden age of America at the beginning of the 20th century, when everything was about money. There was a lot of corruption, and it was all about sort of politicians and magnates, tycoons, sort of doing deals with each other.
Well, if you look at the pictures that he's brandished of what it's going to look like when it's built, it's torn from the pages of Versailles and looks like it would make a perfect set for Bridgerton. I mean, you can absolutely imagine that kind of ball being hosted. I mean, he says that his serious intent is to make it a venue for foreign visitors and their entourages to be hosted by himself and then successive American presidents. And if you think about his property empire more broadly, places like Mar-a-Lago and his hotels around the world, they've invariably got conference facilities attached to them. He claims successive presidents have craved for this kind of a facility. There's no evidence to support that view, and much more concerning about all of this is $300 million of expenditure, all of it being furnished, he says, by himself and his mates. We don't know that we're ever actually going to know which individuals and which corporations have donated money for this venture. and what they're getting in return for it. And that's why there is...
I won't say the name, but at least one big media corporation has put a lot of money in, which makes you wonder, are they going to get special access in return for that?
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Let's turn on to, because Trump has also said that only unhinged leftists are worried about this. Let's turn on to the other big story of the day from him, which is he is going to impose what he says are tremendous sanctions on Russia after that last Putin phone call. Two companies in particular, Rosneft and Lukoil, which I think are half of Russia's crude oil exports.
Yes, two biggest Russian oil firms. I mean, pretty extraordinary that they were never sanctioned before, not only by Donald Trump, but not even by Joe Biden, given that we've been at this war in Ukraine now for quite a while. The sanctions themselves will freeze any assets that those two companies have in the United States. And Lukoil has some retail petrol stations on the eastern seaboard of the United States. So I'm not clear what happens to those. And it also means that the two companies will not be able to engage in any financial transactions that touch American financial institutions, and that could cause them real difficulty. Whether this represents a complete U-turn by Donald Trump and a true hardening of his position with Vladimir Putin, or whether in a week's time we've done another U-turn and another 180, anything could happen.
Because as I understand it, almost all of Russia's crude oil exports go to two countries. They go to either China or India.
Yes.
And the big question is, do the Americans, does Trump start to have secondary sanctions on Chinese or Indian companies dealing with?
Well, he's of course already placed
Russia.
Those tariffs on India, which are due to penalise India for their acquisition of Russian oil.
India is now saying we're going to stop taking Russian oil, is that right?
Donald Trump says Narendra Modi told him that he would no longer buy Russian oil. The Indians have notably not confirmed that. And secondary sanctions against China have been in the wind, but not actually have come to fruition. What we see is whiplash. It was only a week ago, it was last Friday, that he announced he was going to go to Budapest for another summit meeting with Vladimir Putin.
And that has now been cancelled, yes. Yeah. Very, very interesting. So it does seem perhaps that, again, he has maybe looked at the papers and thought, I'm being played by Putin, I don't like it, I'm embarrassed, I'm angry, and I'm going to do something.
Well, and critically, of course, he had the words of the NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte whispered into his ear yesterday, just before that sanctions announcement was made. And I think we keep seeing he's only ever as good as the last person he's heard from.
Really, really interesting. Simon, thank you so much for explaining all of that to us so lucidly. Now, the doctors are going on strike again, halfway through next month, just as the NHS hits its really busy winter period. Resident doctors, we used to call them junior doctors, are going on strike for 5 days, from the first thing on Friday the 14th. Now, this is the 13th such strike since spring 2023. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, calls it preposterous. Let's talk now to Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. I wanted to know how much of a blow this would be to the Health Secretary, who thought he was getting on better at the moment with the management of the BMA.
Well, this is terrible news for anyone who works in anyone who leads in the health service. These strikes, we do our best to prepare for them, to mitigate the impact, but inevitably there is an impact, and particularly there tends to be an impact on waiting lists because other medical staff, consultants have to be in urgent emergency care to ensure that they're meeting those kind of life-threatening conditions that people have, emergencies that they have, and that has an impact on what they can do in terms of outpatients appointments and waiting list activity. So, as someone who represents NHS leaders, I would say even at this late stage, I would urge the BMA to go back to the negotiating table, because these strikes at this time, just as we go into winter, will have a really bad impact.
I want to ask about both of those things you've just said there. The Health Foundation analysis shows that progress towards getting waiting lists down has been steady, albeit very slow indeed. Do you think another set of strikes could actually reverse the progress on waiting lists?
The NHS is working flat out. We've had good figures this year on improving productivity, more activity. We face higher demand than we've ever had before. One of the consistent themes when I talk to leaders is that they face higher demand, whether that's in general practice or turning up at hospitals. But we have been making progress. But yes, it is fragile. And if you take 5 days of medical activity, a lot of activity out of that, you add the extra cost because it's not like we can close down services when the resident doctors are on strike. We still have to keep the hospitals open. They still have to pay for the costs of the hospital and the other staff, but we're not able to do the same amount of activity. So it impacts patients, it impacts budget, and it will impact that fragile progress we're making on waiting lists.
And you mentioned also that the NHS is just entering the really tough winter season. There are stories around about a particularly virulent strain of flu and worries that not enough people this year have had flu jabs. What are you picking up?
Vaccination rates I've seen recently are good, better than I think they were last year, but we still need to go further. And it's really, really important that the public who are entitled to those flu vaccinations do get them. It makes a really big difference. It's good for your health and it's good for the health service. But yeah, there was a really bad flu season in Australia and New Zealand, and that kind of tends to predict what's going to happen here.
Yeah. Finally, can I ask you about a couple of other stories? So Julian Hartley, head of the Care Quality Commission, has resigned this afternoon because he was boss of the Leeds Teaching Hospitals Trust, which had really serious problems over its maternity care. Again, a blow for the Health Secretary, a blow for leadership across the NHS. Your response?
I think it was probably inevitable that Julian Hartley, who I think is an honourable man, that he would feel that it was not possible for him to undertake this role at CQC at the same time as there was growing concern about what has happened at Leeds maternity provision over recent years. He was appointed by the Secretary of State, and it will be a blow. CQC has had many challenges over recent years. I think Julian Hartley was making progress on those, so they're going to need new leadership soon, because on the one hand we need the CQC because it's a very important body in terms of maintaining standards.
It's effectively, we should say, it's effectively the watchdog for the NHS.
It is, and the challenge for CQC is to ensure patient safety and drive up standards of healthcare, but to do that in a way that doesn't get in the way of innovation and change, because we need to do things differently in the health service. I don't think the CQC has always got that balance right in the past. It does need to get it right in the future.
Matthew, let me ask you finally about one, I think, probably good news story about the NHS, which is that menopause screening is going to be made routine for everybody aged between 40 and 74 every 5 years. And that goes alongside all the screening for cancers and heart problems and so forth. Is this an important moment in the health service, as it were, correcting a historic wrong or an underestimation of the problems facing older women?
Absolutely. I think it is really good news, and I think it's one of a number of things that we've needed to over the years to address the way in which women have not been fully understood or their needs not fully represented in the health service. So I think it is important progress. It's a success for those people who've campaigned for this.
Not all the news is bad news. Matthew Taylor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, up next, and as always on a Thursday evening, we round off our week with a stellar political panel, so stay tuned for a look back on all the week's biggest moments. But the time now, 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
As Donald Trump imposes swingeing oil sanctions on Putin's Russia, is this a sign that finally, the US president is seeing the scales fall from his eyes over Putin's motives?
Ian Dale on LBC.
For the nappies, peekaboos and tea parties, mess, tantrums and sleepless nights, all those yo-yos, action figures and shinies, lifts to mates, lifts to parties, lifts everywhere. For each and every one of those teenage years. Let's be honest, you probably owe your parents one. So tell them about pension credit. It could boost their pension income by an average of over £4,000 a year. Pension credit. Credit where credit's due. Eligibility criteria apply.
Get
next summer sorted. Book a Jet2 holiday now and take your pick of our best rooms, flights and hotels. You'll get 22 kilograms of baggage included, and right now there's £120 off per couple with MyJet2. Book now with just a £60 deposit per person and lock in the price for next summer. Jet2 Holidays. Package holidays you can trust. Up to national protected. Subject to availability and conditions.
Amazon offers term time working to their employees, like Anton, who's home to look after his daughters during their holidays.
Hello?
To him, this is the best sound in the world. Actually, maybe that's the best sound of all. Now that's term time working, offered at Amazon. 10 weeks off guaranteed per year. Mix of paid holiday and unpaid time off. Conditions apply.
Leading Britain's Conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:50. And another week of tumbling stories, almost too fast, almost too many to remember. Can we make any sense of it? Oh, yes, we can. Because on this week's panel, I'm joined by two colleagues who know their onions. Bethany Dawson of Politico's London Diary and James Heale, the Deputy Political Editor at The Spectator. Welcome to you both. And there's so much we could talk about, but it seems to me that perhaps the biggest, most significant story in terms of people listening is the near collapse of the grooming gangs inquiry. And we've talked about Jess Phillips under huge pressure. But let's just sort of rehearse how big a problem this has been for the government, because Keir Starmer didn't want this inquiry to happen at all in the first place. He kept saying we didn't need a national inquiry, only local ones, and then he was driven to agree that this should happen. And really quite quickly it's falling apart. Bethany?
It's falling apart, and some victims involved in the inquiry are saying they will not continue if Home Office Minister Jess Phillips is part of it, but others on the inquiry are saying they won't continue if she's not on it. So there's this split within the inquiry that is struggling to kind of stay on course, figuring out what's next. Whilst Keir Starmer has affirmed that Jess Phillips still has his full support. However, it's never a good news day when one of your ministers and one of your most popular ministers, at least within the media, is under such pressure.
Yes, James, first of all, your sense in your waters as to whether she survives or not. I know it's difficult, but also what you thought about Kemi Badenoch's performance. She really went for Jess Phillips in a very personal way at Prime Minister's questions.
I think Jess Phillips will survive it because, as Bethany said, there is confusion there. And I think that Jess has really made her career talking very much about domestic abuse victims, and I think most people would accept that she's sincere in this. However, I think that sincerity sometimes blinds her to how her appearance comes to others. So I thought her performance in the House on Tuesday badly misjudged the mood of the House. Watching that on television initially, but then talking to MPs afterwards, I think her defensiveness came across as it alienated a lot of people who were watching sort of on the fence. So I think that she hasn't handled it brilliantly, but I think she will get through it because, as you know, to get rid of her, I mean, I'm not sure exactly anyone will be in a particularly much better position given Labour's difficulties on the issue. On the point about Kemi Badenoch, I thought she did pretty well, but ultimately these are sort of the weeks where Keir Starmer's on the back foot. It's sort of scoring the tap-ins rather than actually sort of going for sort of 30-yard screamers.
Yes, he wasn't enjoying himself in the Commons at all this week. Let me ask about the Prince Andrew story, because at one level, this is nothing to do with British politics. The royal family have stripped him, or he persuaded him to renounce various titles. And then we had the leader of the SNP at Westminster, Stephen Flynn, coming into the show and saying, no, we need legislation to formally strip him of all the titles. Let's see how many other MPs come alongside me to do this. And the short answer so far is very few.
It's not really a situation that's comfortable wading into, right? If I was an MP, I think I would be listening to my colleagues who are trying to persuade me to stay stum, because it feels like quite a dicey issue, right? But then today, the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, has gone against what the government said. The government said they cannot make any, they cannot have a debate on Prince Andrew, and whereas Lindsay Hoyle said actually you can. There is just specific ways in which you have to do that, and then he reminded the House of the rules. So there's a bit of an uncomfortable relationship now on this issue between the Speaker and the rest of the House, because the people that want that debate, the MPs that want that debate across the House, now have that sort of energy behind them saying, well, actually we can, so should we get going? So I think this is going to continue into next week and be more of a headache for Keir.
Very, very interesting. Talking about the Speaker, James, I was sitting in the press gallery watching Prime Minister's questions, as I do, and I looked to my right, and to my surprise and slight shock, I saw Nigel Farage grinning at me. Not grinning at me, grinning at all of us, I think, because he was sitting in the gallery, not in the chamber, alongside the journalists. And he said afterwards, this was because the Speaker wasn't calling him enough. Now, it's a stunt, but it's a stunt that's going to have some effect, I suspect.
Yes, certainly. I think it's sort of raising awareness of an issue which might seem quite procedural or technical to many people listening, not Parliament, etc. His whole point is that every week Labour MPs are given these questions, planted questions, to stand up and attack him with no recourse, no right of reply, as he sees it. And so this is the debate which he's kicked off, which is that should he be given more questions at PMQs? Obviously, we have an existing system, and it's based on the number of seats won at the last election. Inevitably, though, you're going to get different voices. I think former Labour Special Advisor Theo Bertram is one of them, suggesting there should be more time for Farage at PMQs. I don't think the stunt worked as well as it might have done, because I think everyone forgot that you're not allowed to take photos in the chamber, and no one could see up in the public gallery. And actually, it was the wrong week to do so, given the grooming gang seriousness.
Yes, two other things I picked up. Aggie Chambre, who was in that seat a little while ago, was saying that actually there are ways of getting more questions, getting more involvement, which Nigel Farage had not picked up. In other words, there were procedural tricks or methods that he could have used and hadn't. So that's.
Well, I also just say I think that speaking to people in Reform, my understanding is Nigel Farage is pretty irritated by how Westminster works compared to Strasbourg, where you knew when your time was. He finds it an immense waste of his time to sit there for 3 hours waiting in the hope you'll be called, and then of course unlikely to do so in many cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Nigel Farage takes us to the word Brexit, which was a word the Labour Party was absolutely determined never to say in public before, during and after the election campaign. And suddenly it's back again. Suddenly we've got Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, talking about Brexit the whole time, because they're trying to blame Brexit on the parlous political, economic state of the country. Bethany, good idea or silly idea?
I think it's verging on silly, because what people are going to hear is not what Labour want, which is the Conservatives did a bad job with the implementation and Nigel Farage did a bad job with getting us all talking about Brexit. What they're going to hear is voters did a bad job by voting for Brexit, and that's not going to win any support if people feel the government is blaming them for the economy going wrong. Speaking to insiders in Labour, they say, well, no, that strategy is to blame it on the Conservatives, to blame it on Reform. And whilst that is obvious to people in SW1, and you can kind of see it through, if you read between the lines of all the tweets and the TikToks and whatnot, it isn't as obvious and transparent as I think it as Labour want it to be for that kind of gotcha moment.
And if you look at the opinion polls, James, unless something big changes, then Reform is going to form the next government.
Absolutely. So they're trying every different attack line. And so speaking to people in Reform, the Carefully by-election has been an interesting kind of microcosm, a trailer, if you like, for the movie that's about to
we can't talk about that tonight, not for a few hours yet, but I'm sure it'll...
I think that it's going to be really interesting to see the attacks that are being used. Brexit is one. I think the difficulty for Labour, of course, is that it's a massive change in strategy. So they haven't spoken about Brexit for sort of 5 years. And now to talk about it now, when, of course, the whole kind of Labour strategy was previously about trying to minimise this as an issue, and saying that actually Brexit would be safe in their hands is quite, I think, jarring to some people. And of course it then becomes, well, look, actually there's been policy choices since July 24, raising NICs, for instance, in the last budget. That's obviously a massive issue and something to blame for some of the problems.
Thank you both very much indeed. Final thought from me on the Duke of York story, or Prince Andrew's story. This is one of the most monarchist parliaments we've ever had. There isn't even a single Willie Hamilton saying the whole thing is disgraceful, it should be torn down. Quite remarkably small C Conservative. Anyway, on that thought, thanks to both of you. Now, as the King and the Pope prayed together earlier today, history was made, marking the first time in more than 500 years that an English king has prayed alongside the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. Earlier, I spoke to the leader of the Catholic Church in England and Wales, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, who joined us from Rome to ask how might the king dwell on the crisis in his family over Prince Andrew during this reflective moment.
I'm quite sure that in the King's heart, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if it wasn't in the Pope's heart, was the heartache of the situation of the royal family and of that victim, Virginia, as well.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them, You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. So download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish, but right now it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. Finally, the US president is seeing the scales fall from his eyes over Vladimir Putin's motives. Is this the moment Putin has made a terrible strategic